I wanted to talk to you about lies, truth and lies. It's really quite extraordinary. Donald Trump met with members of Congress yesterday, both Republicans and Democrats, and apparently it was a fairly cordial kind of get-to-know-you kind of meeting. But Trump did it again. I mean, this Hunter over at Daily Kos captures it well. His headline, in meeting with congressional leaders, Trump again lies, claims he won the popular vote after all. And then this is from Politico. In his first meeting with congressional leaders of both parties since taking office, President Donald Trump on Monday reiterated a debunked claim that he only lost the national popular vote because of widespread voter fraud. Right. The Washington Post is more specific. Trump told our nation's top legislators that, quote, between 3 and 5 million illegal votes caused him, Trump, to lose the popular vote. This is obviously insane. There isn't evidence of even 1,000 votes, people voting illegally, much less millions. Actually, there's not even evidence of dozens of people voting illegally. But there's a very real political consequence to this. And a very real psychological consequence to it. George Lakoff years ago wrote a book called Don't Think About an Elephant. And it was an old cliche that comes out of linguistics and psychology and neurolinguistic programming, that in order to not think about something, you have to first think about it. If I say, don't think about the possibility that clouds could be bright orange, you have to imagine a bright orange cloud before you can kind of put an X through it in your brain and say, no, that's not possible. Which means that I just put a bright orange cloud in your brain, right? You tell somebody, don't think about an elephant. It's not possible. You just said elephant. I'm thinking about an elephant. And there's an actual technology to this. I think it was 8 years ago when we I did this online, and Sue Nethercutt helped out a lot and transcribed a lot of it, and we put it together as a book, Cracking the Code, a book on the psychology of communication and political communication. And one of the fundamental principles of this is that the brain at its deepest levels cannot process a negative. Only the highest functions of our brains are capable of reversing meaning, of taking something and turning it into not something. So if you say to somebody, well, I never thought you were a jerk, right? They're immediately thinking, I'm a jerk, right? Even though he said, never thought, right? Anytime you put a negative in front of something, you're creating, at least for a fleeting moment, the perception of the positive. And the problem with this, and there's really solid science behind this. In fact, Politico did Maria Konnikova wrote a great piece about this called Trump's Lies versus Your Brain. And she pulls together the scientific research on this. I think I did a pretty good job of that, too, in my book, Cracking the Code, on the chapter on, using negatives and double negatives and triple negatives and all those kind of things. But she talks about how lies become real, and particularly if they are consistent with a pre-existing belief system. In other words, if you've been hearing on Fox so-called news or on right-wing hate radio for years and years and years that there's millions of, and see, by even saying this, I'm putting this out, but I realize that most of the audience I'm talking to is somewhat pre-immunized to it. That's why I said if it goes along with your previously held beliefs, lies just slide right in there. If it contrasts with your previously held beliefs, then you get this collision. But if Trump were to repeat this, 3 to 5 million people voted illegally in the last election a couple of times, first of all the people who've been watching Fox so-called news and right-wing hate radio and reading, sites like Drudge and Breitbart, they're going to just absolutely accept that because it's consistent with their worldview. And if you come along and say, here is a report which proves that this isn't true, they could read the entire report and simply say, I don't believe it. I mean, it's really that simple. And with Trump, it's particularly problematic because it's not just that he lies about big things. He lies about everything. I mean, he just like randomly lies. This guy just kind of creates reality around himself, which is fine if you're a billionaire real estate developer in New York. I guess you can create your own reality. Oh, that guy didn't do good enough work. Don't, just screw him and his family, the guy who did the woodworking on our new hotel. Don't pay him. Let him try to sue me. It's only a couple $100,000. It'll wipe him out, but nothing to us. Right? I mean, you can create those kind of alternative realities, but what's her name here? Marina writes, in his own autobiography, Trump used the phrase truthful hyperbole, a term coined by his ghostwriter, referring to the flagrant truth stretching that Trump employed over and over to help close sales. I would add Trump University might be a classic example of this. Trump apparently loved the wording and went on to adopt it as its own. Talks about how Harvard University psychologist Daniel Gilbert, more than 20 years ago, argued that people see the world in two steps. First, even just briefly, we hold the lie as true. We must accept something in order to understand it. Pink cloud or the orange cloud, right? You have to imagine it. The elephant, you have to imagine it in order to have any kind of process, cognitive process around it, thinking process around it. So, unfortunately, she writes, while the first step is a natural part of thinking, it happens automatically and effortlessly. The second step can be easily disrupted. It takes work. We must actively choose to accept or reject each statement we hear. Otherwise, it just sticks in there. Our brains are particularly ill-equipped to deal with lies when they come not singly, but in a constant stream. We're going to save your health care. We're going to save Social Security. We're going to save Medicare. We're going to save Medicaid. All the time that they're doing the opposite. We're going to protect the environment when they're not. We're going to fix public education when, in fact, they want to privatize it. We're going to, it goes on and on. And then she writes, but Trump goes a step further. If he has a particular untruth he wants to propagate, not just an undifferentiated barrage, he simply states it over and over. And as it turns out, sheer repetition of the same lie can eventually mark it as true in our heads. It's an effect known as illusory truth, first discovered in the 1970s. Repetition of any kind, this is really bad news, because repetition of any kind, even to refute the statement in question, only serves to solidify it. So a New York Times headline saying Trump lies about crowd size, says crowd was over 1 million, is going to cause people to plant in their brain basically two separate things. One, that Trump is lying, and the other, that 1 million people were on the mall. When in fact, it was like, a couple 100,000. Why? Because that's just how our brains process information. We take this stuff in. So, for example, if you say it's not true that there was voter fraud, you accomplish the opposite of what you want. Because the brain doesn't, the unconscious brain, the conscious brain processes the not. The unconscious brain does not process it. She writes, in politics, false information has a special power. If false information comports with pre-existing beliefs, attempts to refute it actually backfire, planting it even more firmly in a person's mind. Brendan Nyhan, a political scientist at Dartmouth University who studies false beliefs, has found that false information is specifically political in nature, part of our political identity. It becomes almost impossible to correct lies. And then they cite the studies that they did. They actually, this is the subject of serious academic work. And then she asks, so what can we do? Well, again, here the news is not particularly promising. When we're in an environment headed by someone who lies so often, something frightening happens. We stop reacting to the liar as a liar. His lying becomes normalized. And that's where we're at. Donald Trump, literally lying every day so far, and embedding this stuff in our brains. This is mind-boggling. And there's not an easy way to deal with this, which is why Germany and Japan went down the roads they did. So I'm going to get back to a little more of this after the break, but stick around.